when the Hindu majority oppressed the minorities. No. If you want to promote Indian things, then start with Indian languages. And so that Thomas Babington Macaulay promoted the policy of more English. In Germany, you have a system called Kirchensteuer, church tax. English was not considered. See, that generation of the freedom struggle who had gained independence, they were all absolutely sure that a decolonized country cannot have the language of the colonizer as its medium of administration. The idea of love jihad, by the way, is also launched by them. You see, it's always the Hindus are being blamed, but it's the Christians who have first drawn attention to this. Well, there is one factor that you don't take into account. It is Muslims leaving Islam.
Welcome to the Nationalist Madrasi. Today we have a very special guest, Dr. Koenraad Elst is joined with us, and thank you so much, sir, for joining with us. It's always a pleasure to hear you, and he's a man who needs no introduction in the intellectual field of India, especially because he has written a number of books based on the works which has done by the RSS, and he has written a number of books on the Hindu religion as well. Thank you so much, sir, for your time, for spending some time with us. It's always a pleasure talking to you, and so let us discuss something in depth and in detail as well, sir. Thank you. Welcome to our show, sir. Firstly,
Thank you.
thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Sir, the concept of making India more Hindu, because not India, like individually, if you take many people, they'll be portraying themselves as a less Hindu. As a holistic idea of making India more Hindu, what does it mean to you, sir? Either it is culturally, politically, or socially, sir. What is your take on that, sir?
Well, that's a very difficult question. I'm struggling to find what that means. Making India more Hindu. There is a book by Mirananda, skeptical, progressive, maybe good scientist, no doubt. But in this whole discussion, she doesn't understand a number of basic concepts, which is nothing against her because it counts for most people. And it counted for me until I started researching. The word Hindu in itself simply means Indian except for certain other communities. So the word Hindu originally was the Persian word for India. Their pronunciation of Sindhu, the name of the river. And the word was taken over from Persian to their neighboring languages, to Arabic, to Chinese, to Greek, and Latin, and all the Western languages. So it became India. And so it had a purely geographical sense.
Okay.
Outside India.
Got it.
And in India, the word was not known until the Islamic invasions, the 8th century. And then they brought the word India or Hindu with them. And so inside India, it came to mean Indian except for Muslims. So it had a communal meaning from the beginning. So it meant all unbelievers, all pagans, all kuffar in India. But so there were pagans elsewhere also, but so those in India were called Hindu. And this included everything un-Islamic. So it meant Vedic, but it also meant tribal, and it meant Buddhist. The Buddhists, they called clean-shaven Brahmins. So, for them, there were not much doctrinal difference. This also included sects that didn't even exist yet in the 8th century, like the Sikhs, the Veerasaivas, the Arya Samaj, the Ramakrishna Mission, which famously in the 1980s went to court to be deregistered as Hindu, to be recognized as something else. They didn't get it. But so anyway, according to the original definition, they're all Hindus. No matter what much they claim or, that they don't like being called Hindu, they fall under the definition.
Got it, got it, got it, got it.
And so making India Hindu, well, that doesn't mean much unless you mean making it less Muslim and less Christian.
Okay. So it is more of a cultural oriented thing to make an Hindu, India more Hindu.
Of course.
Okay. Got it, got it, got it. So can a multi-religious society or a multi-religious country like India is secular because Hindus are in the majority and Hindus follow the way of secularism. You can just see the neighboring countries how secularism is being followed. Like for example, Bangladesh or Pakistan, or we can keep on saying. So can a multi-religious, secular, democratic country like India reconcile the idea of Hindu Rashtra? What is your take on that, sir?
Well, yeah, it is possible. It's another question whether it's desirable, but of course it's possible. You see, even Pakistan somehow has minorities. They're not doing very well, but they still exist after 80 years. So all the more so if you have a pluralistic religion like Hinduism enshrined as state religion. Only, this is an idea that doesn't say much to me. Having a state religion, I don't know. As Veerbhadra Mishra used to say. Veerbhadra Mishra was my landlord when I rented a room in Varanasi some 35 years ago. And he was also the convener of the Swachha Ganga campaign, being himself a professor of fluid mechanics. And he was also the head priest of the Sankat Mochan temple, important Hanuman temple. Yeah. And he said, a religion that relies on the state will become weak. Now, you could bring in against that, well, all the Islamic states, Islam is doing fairly well in them. So state support clearly has not weakened Islam. Maybe so. In Christian countries, I don't know. I have seen Christianity weaken enormously, and the relative state support that they receive has not saved them, or has not saved Christianity. So I am inclined to think, no, you see, what you need is not state support. You need the state to facilitate religions to flourish, but the flourishing you will have to do on your own. You have to yourself make religions grow and flourish indeed. In Germany, you have a system called Kirchensteuer, church tax. And that means that ultimately churches get their financial support in proportion to the people who support them. And, that makes good sense. So that means that it's not the state that decides how money is allotted to different religious groups. It's they themselves who utter or who affirm their right to exist, their will to exist. And so in that proportion, see, the state, allows them. and that's a very sensible system. Um, so the state has to facilitate what is going on, and then it is the religious communities themselves who have to organize themselves, make themselves flourish, and so on. It's like the state lays the motorway, and then it's the people who drive cars who have to make those motorways alive, functional. So the role of the state there must be limited. And so the term Hindu Rashtra sounds a bit too statist, a bit too theocratic, and I would warn against that. Now, knowing Hindus, I don't think they will get as oppressive as Islam does or as Christianity has done whenever it was a state religion. So, in that sense, I don't make a drama out of it. I think it's a bad idea, but I don't make a drama of it at all. You see, in history, there is no moment when the Hindu majority oppressed the minorities. No. Whereas in the other sense, of course, the Portuguese seriously oppressed all other religions. The British did not, but still Christians had a privileged position at the time, which they, to some extent, even have maintained after independence. Muslims, of course, that is well known. They have very seriously oppressed Hindus, even when not by force. You had all kinds of discriminations. So compared to that, there's nothing on the Hindu side, and so in that sense, you see, whether you call it the Hindu Rashtra or something else, I don't think very much is going to change with this rather, tolerant, easygoing Hindu attitude.
Sir, can we come to a conclusion that British colonial policy and education system impacted the Hindu identity or the Hindu institutions? Can we come to a conclusion, sir?
Well, yes, you are referring to Thomas Babington Macaulay, who turned education into an anglicizing machine. And to understand his position, in the late 18th and early 19th century, you had a debate going on gradually, slowly, between two parties among the British, namely the Orientalists or Orientalizers and the Anglicists or Anglicizers. So the Orientalists, I always call myself an Orientalist, but I am. So Edward Said, an Arab dhimmi, born Christian, but very much in favor of Islam and trying to curry favor with the Muslims and so on. He coined it, well, he re-gave a definition, he gave a new definition to the word Orientalist, very pejorative, as if, all agents of British imperialism. So the word Orientalist simply means, and in Dutch and in German it still means, a scholar of the Orient. Somebody who does what others do for, Greek culture and Latin culture and so on. This they do for Japanese culture or Hindu culture or so. And that's simply a perfectly respectable academic discipline. And so this pejorative use is historically pretty incorrect. But, the interesting thing here is that it shows how meek Hindus tend to be. So many Hindus have taken over this pejorative, this negative use of the word Orientalist. Whereas in Hindu history, and this is very specific for this country, uh, much less an issue in all the other Oriental countries. But so in India specifically, the word Orientalist has a history of its own, somewhat different from the simple academic meaning of the research into the Orient. Namely, it means a party in one particular debate, namely those who were in favor of teaching through a native medium. So they wanted Sanskrit and or the vernaculars as the medium of education. And whereas the Anglicizers said, this is all too difficult, too complicated, and so on, let's simply teach them English.
Got it.
And you see, they themselves were active in Bengal, where this policy had already been carried out to some extent. And you had quite a few people who were already pro-English. Mostly because, they knew English, others didn't. So they had an interest in promoting English. And so it is in those circles that Thomas Babington Macaulay promoted the policy of more English. Now, strictly speaking, he did not want to Anglicize India as a whole. What he said in his minute on education is that he wanted to create a class of intermediaries who translate English ideas into the vernaculars. So the majority of the population he did not expect to become English, but at least to become culturally more English while speaking Telugu or Gujarati or whatever, but nevertheless that the English look at the world would percolate and would replace Hinduism. And he thought that this was good. There is a famous speech that was never given, namely a speech ascribed to Macaulay, where he says we have to destroy this strong culture. It's such a beautiful, successful culture, and because it makes India so strong, we have to destroy it. Now that's a fake. That speech that does not exist. And so, many people, presidents and, ministers and so on have quoted that speech. But it's a total mistake. He never gave that. And in the real speech he gave, in his minute of education, he presents his policy as something beneficial to the natives. You see, he thinks it is good to liberate them from the shackles of this obscurantist religion and, bring them out of it, make them more English. And he even, this is 1835, more than a century before the independence. A century before independence was something that people massively struggled for. There was a freedom movement. Remember? Well, a century earlier, Thomas Babington Macaulay visualized the prospect of Indian independence. However, he thought, and so this is typical colonial paternalism, he thought that at that time, Indians, whether Hindus or Muslims, were essentially children caught up in a primitive stage of civilization, and so they had to be helped up, and they had to be anglicized for their own good. They would outgrow their miserable, backward Hinduism and Islam and come to Western civilization. And then, when they have grown up, then they will be our equals, and then it is time for independence.
Is there any ways to revive the Sanskrit or the traditional art and architecture of the dharmic education system, because that paves way for the Hindu route? Is there any ways to revive all those things? So what is your thought process on that?
Well, you see, it is certainly possible. There have been so many revivals in every sphere of life, and so this can be done. Only, and especially in a democratic society where everybody thinks he has a say in decision making, you will have to find, if not a majority, at least a strong, a critical mass of people who want this. And so at the moment, I'm not sure about that. Of course, I don't have my finger on the pulse of Indian, society. I mean, I hang out in very specific circles, and I don't think they're entirely representative. So I'm not very sure what opinion is.
Mm.
And let me start a bit earlier with the Constituent Assembly, which had a subcommittee for the language issue. And in there, ultimately, they were having a vote that was to determine future status of languages. So, for the national link language, they had a choice between Shuddh Hindi, that is a purified Hindi, and Sanskrit. English was not considered. See, that generation of the freedom struggle who had gained independence, they were all absolutely sure that a decolonized country cannot have the language of the colonizer as its medium of administration. This is remarkable. But in Africa, for example, the French ex-colonies still function in French, and English ex-colonies in English, and Portuguese in Portuguese. So, but those, most of the languages are small. So if you want to produce textbooks for schools and other documents, it's very expensive comparatively. At least if you want to, satisfy every single language community. They have no literary tradition and so on. So it requires a lot of work to set that up. And so for the time being, most countries have decided not to do that. Simply go by, the old system. So, the school books they use in France, they give them also just for free. Especially now it's easy to produce this and so on. So the same textbooks by French authors are given to the French African countries. And, they continue. Whereas India, of course, with its large language communities and its rich literary tradition, felt strong enough to go by the vernaculars, by the native languages. By the way, people outside India don't realize just how important they are. For example, Telugu is probably the biggest language in the world of which nobody knows the name. Only Indians know about Telugu or about Kannada or about Malayalam.
Tamil.
Okay? But so the biggest one I think is Telugu. Bengali, of course, people know. Tamil, not that anyone knows Tamil, but they have heard on the news that there are, groups that speak Tamil. They don't know about the Telugu. So that's spoken by 70, 80 million people. So that's more than enough to, write and then print textbooks in that language. So, you can do that. You can go with those languages as medium. However, what seemed obvious in 1948 is not supported by many people today. Especially for Sanskrit. You see, if the choice had been Sanskrit, back then things were possible that are unthinkable now. You see, if you would propose Sanskrit today, you would have an enormous cacophony of different arguments against it. So the Dravidianists would be against it because it's not Dravidian, and the Muslims and the Christians would be against it because of its Hindu associations. And the whole secularist crowd, all the anglicized people, of which there are more and more, would be against it because it would be, not advantageous to them. So that was much less 70, 80 years ago. Then at that time, you see, even people whom you would think were opponents, like Dr. Ambedkar, or like some of the Muslim leaders in the Constituent Assembly, were in favor of Sanskrit.
Ambedkar was very much in favor of. Dr. Ambedkar was very much in favor of Sanskrit.
Yes. So it was possible at the time. And if it had become Sanskrit, it would have worked. Because everybody had respect for Sanskrit. And even if it's a difficult language, it's difficult for everyone. And so that would have worked. And by contrast, Hindi, even though easy for 40% or so of the population for whom it's a mother tongue, and fairly easy for most others, just provokes protest. And so not too many people respect Hindi. In fact, indeed most Hindi speakers don't respect Hindi very much because it's an artificial language. It's sort of a sort of Esperanto between Marwari and Bhojpuri and all the different so-called dialects of Hindi. Some people say, no, these are languages in their own right. And Hindi is only some in-between language, some pidgin, so that the different languages can understand each other. Of course, that was the situation at the time of independence. Today, many people speak school Hindi. And I can more or less follow, though I've never learned anything except school Hindi. Okay? And so when people speak real Bhojpuri or real Marwari or so, I have a hard time following. And so in that sense, it's a natural movement that you find in all the big languages, Chinese and so on. You have standardization with, you see, the TV news as the main agent of standardization, followed by all the school textbooks. And so, okay, it happens nevertheless, that feeling among all these Hindi speakers that they're not really speaking their own language is very much there. Then the speakers of other languages than Hindi, they think their own Gujarati or Bengali or so is superior, especially the Bengalis think so. And, about the attitude of the others. Well, you have seen the recent incidents in Karnataka, in Tamil Nadu, in Maharashtra now. So, people don't like Hindi, even though most of them understand it. Also, thanks to Bollywood, thanks to the entertainment industry. Nevertheless, to make that the alternative to English, it doesn't succeed very well. So as an outsider, when I look at the situation, I'd have to say, well, the only real alternative is Sanskrit. But you see, to present that to the people today will be 100 times more difficult than at the time of independence. So you have a problem there.
Got it.
And so what is now happening is that India is gradually sliding towards the Anglosphere. And so publishers in English, of course, do see India already as a very important part of the Anglosphere. Not fully English speaking, but at least the English speakers are already as numerous as, let's say, the Americans, are very numerous. So you go into a bookstore, you will find some works in Hindi, but most of the serious stuff is in English. And so unless someone really yells stop to this slide towards the Anglosphere, it's going to continue. And I don't see anyone yelling stop. You see, in the 50s, the Johnson was very much in favor of the de-Anglicization, of putting a stop to English. And you had his party chairman, Raghuveer, who devised a big dictionary with all the newly made Hindi words that were to replace English terms for modern technology, modern administration, and so on. In some sectors, these words have caught on, particularly in the administration. If you have to go to some office, you will find some Shudh Hindi name. But otherwise, in technology, much less. And then, especially in like the trendy words, the words from the movies and so on, English is all over the place. And so people who don't know Hindi, but who listen to, let's say, a TV discussion, will be able to more or less follow because there are so many English words in it. Got it. So, like the typical Hindi you hear here in Delhi, you will see that many words of significance within a Hindi sentence are in English. And so this is not only words that in Hindi don't exist or are artificial. No, it's whichever word has the semantic emphasis. Like the example that really, made it very visible to me when Ram Swaroop died. This is in 98. I was in some office and at some point, you see, our conversation was interrupted by some peon who came in and in dramatic tones he said, Ram Swaroop dead ho gaya. So the significant word in this case was his passing. So dead. The rest was in Hindi, but dead, the significant word was in English.
Got it.
Or this can be numbers, for example. If that's what it's about, then that number will be in English. And it's your decision, of course.
Got it.
I mean, if you want to promote Indian things, then start with Indian languages. And so This is what I, propose, but I have no illusions, if there isn't a serious movement of, language purification or something, this is just not going to happen.
Let us also discuss some legal challenges of India becoming more Hindu. The Uniform Civil Code. What is your take on that? And would the Uniform Civil Code affect Hindu and the non-Hindu communities differently, or will it be equal to all the communities?
Yeah, well, the Uniform Civil Code is not a Hindu demand.
And an additional question to that:
Yeah.
what uh, legal or the policy reforms would be necessary to protect the Hindu identity today? Because in some of the areas there is a demographic change where there are some problems. We'll talk about that.
So that's not a Hindu demand. That's a secularist demand. Um, you see, in Hindu society, traditionally you had different law systems. You see, and here, you have all the, Ambedkarites and so on are going to say, oh, Manusmriti, oh, look what ugly, vicious writing, the Manusmriti. First of all, they haven't read the Manusmriti. They only know a few sentences from it that indeed are debatable. But otherwise, they don't know what they're saying. But yeah, I mean, there are many nice things in Manusmriti, but yes, there are some seriously contentious phrases in there also. However, that was never the law. You see, the law was mostly a matter of another institution that is abhorred, namely caste. So you see, sometimes the king had to intervene and impose his will, but generally the state was a small state, didn't meddle much in society. And so in society you had communities that governed themselves. And so if there was any authority that made the law and could change the law, it was the caste panchayat. And so you could have, one community being polygamous, whereas for another it would not be allowed. And one that, was practicing child marriage and one that, had renounced that, and so on. And so there was no common civil code, obviously. Like, for instance, you see, and here again, the Ambedkarites are going to give examples. Oh, look how the Shudras were discriminated against. Okay, let's give another example. Shudras, of course, could get drunk. It didn't matter. I mean, of course, if they were doing a job, let's say in the construction sector, where you have to be sober, otherwise you fall off, your roof that you're building. Okay, but otherwise, I mean, after hours, they can have a drink. And Brahmins, by contrast, were prohibited from drinking, from being anything else than sober. And they said a reason, namely, when they were drunk, when they were, singing drinking carols, they might lampoon even the Vedas that were entrusted to them. And so it was deemed inauspicious if the Vedas were disparaged. And so, I mean, there are all kinds of rationales for these differences in law, but there were differences. It was not a uniform civil code. And so then in the modern age, you see Hindus have adapted to first the British, then, the modern constitution. And so they have adapted to the idea of a uniform civil code, at least among Hindus. But so there is no common civil code at the moment because there are glaring differences with other communities and especially with Muslims. Now, secularism would make a problem of that. And so in a secular state, by definition, everybody is equal before the law, regardless of religion. Yeah, I mean that everybody is equal before the law. The Belgian constitution says it. It's a secular state. So the secular state par excellence, of course, is France, where you have this equality regardless of religion. America has a slightly different form of secularism, which accords a lot of freedom to the different rivaling religious communities, but still you have a uniform law for everyone. And so India doesn't have that. You see, many people who write about Hindu fundamentalism or something, they start by saying on page 1, India is a secular state. And they confirm that by adding that the ugly, vicious Hindu nationalists whose power is ever becoming bigger and bigger and bigger and more threatening, they threaten the secular state. Now, India is not a secular state, you see, because the constitution itself, and then, of course, the Hindu code bill and Muslim, Parsi, Christian equivalents foresee very explicitly difference in law for the different communities. Then, apart from the specific Muslim laws dictated by Islam itself, by Hindu laws more or less dictated by more or less some mix of the different shastras and so on. Apart from that, you also have the whole concept of minority. There is a very explicit discrimination against the majority. You know, I was in a conference about secularism, about Indian about secularism in general, but my paper was, of course, about Indian secularism. And so I started by saying, India is not a secular state. And everybody, yeah, that's right. Yeah. By which they meant, oh yeah, these ugly, vicious Hindus, they try to sort of oppress all the rest. And so this is a sham secularism because they're really the ugly, vicious, overbearing Hindu majority is really oppressing the rest. And so everybody was very surprised when I said it is just the other way around. You see, the minorities are privileged by the Constitution. And, in a secular state, there is no discrimination against the majority, just as there is no discrimination against the minorities. There is no concept of minority. You see, all the citizens are equal before the law, regardless of what community they belong to, and therefore, regardless of whether their community is majoritarian or minoritarian. So, this whole notion of, schools have to be protected for the minorities. And then nothing about the majority. Those schools can be plundered and nationalized and so on by the state. No, you see, in a secular state, these are simply equal. Same with places of worship. The state can't touch the mosques or the churches, whereas it can plunder Hindu temples. So you see, that's an equality that has no place in a common civil code. So I'm all in favor of the common civil code. Nevertheless, just for conceptual clarity, this is not a Hindu demand. This is a secular demand.
Got it.
Now, you ask me what effect it has on the Hindus. So, of course, it's a step in the right direction. It's a good thing for the Hindus on average.
How should India deal with the demographic change? There are extreme cases in West Bengal, in Kerala as well. There is a demographic change which is taking place, and that is wherever there is a demographic change, that is threat to a national security as well. So, what is your take on that? And the religious conversion which is taking place, and should there be heavy anti-conversion laws to stop this religious conversion? What is your take on that? Because this is a major place where India should look upon for becoming more Hindu. What is your take on that, sir?
Yeah, well, okay, let's take these two issues separately. As for the demography, yes, there are serious changes happening. So partly is by the enormous illegal immigration from Bangladesh. So I heard from police sources there is now more than 30 million, but I don't know. This is hearsay. Um, I think it's many millions. It's very palpable, and so in cities like Delhi, the Bangladeshi presence is very large and very consequential. Um, but you see, the main demographic change comes from the birth rate. In Kerala, that's the last figures I've heard, a year or so ago, you had 26% Muslims having 42% of the newborn babies. That's how fast it goes. In one generation, from 26% to 42%. The Christian bishops have noticed this, and already 10, 15 or so years ago, the bishops had a letter read out on Sunday in the churches telling the Christian couples to have 4 children. Mm. So they take this very seriously. The idea of love jihad, by the way, is also launched by them. You see, it's always the Hindus are being blamed, but it's the Christians who have first drawn attention to this. Okay, now, so this is going very fast, and Hindus are not doing anything at all about it. The Shankaracharyas or whoever is in authority is not telling Hindus have more children. And no political party does so either. Among Muslims, I am not aware of much propaganda, but they know, and it's also in Muslim scripture, that Muhammad wanted the Muslims to be more numerous than anyone. And so Islam is quite natalistic. Also, it keeps women in their place, so that promotes a higher birth rate. And they don't have to explicitate it, but their system, inherently promotes a higher birth rate. Like, for instance, so I was saying that the Islamic system inherently promotes a higher birth rate, especially their marriage system. So, and their divorce. You see, take, a young family, 2 children, the parents get divorced, which for Muslim men is very easy. They repudiate their wife. The triple talaq that has been abolished by the BJP, which Muslim women thought very good, and which was not a drastic thing to do because Pakistan has also abolished it. So, that was in fact a local, a subcontinental deviation from Muslim law. So by abolishing that option of triple talaq, he actually restored Muslim law, because the Prophet had laid down that you have to say talaq 3 times, and there must be one menstruation in between, every talaq. So there will be at least 2 months' time between the first and the last one. So you have time to reflect, to discuss with each other and so on, whether you really are going through with this. So That's a wise thing to do, in fact. So that has finger points. But so apart from that, men can unilaterally throw their wives out. The wife can't do that. She has to pass by a judge in order to, get it, to achieve it. Just like Christians and Hindus have to go through the judiciary. But so Muslim men can just repudiate it. But more consequential here is what happens to the children. You see, in the modern West, almost always the children are given to the wife.
Okay.
And now that divorce is becoming more common among Hindus, you find a similar trend. Now, in Islam, this is not possible. The children automatically go to the father. Now, you could say, a man alone with small children, that doesn't work. But the thing is that in a traditional family, there are always women. There is a sister or a mother or something. So the children are taken care of by a woman. And so, it's no problem for the man to keep the children for themselves. What happens to the woman? Now, in the West, and so increasingly also among Hindus, the woman is alone with the care for the children. This means that she is less active on the dating market and less successful because very, very many men don't want the care for somebody else's children. Whereas the men don't have that problem. So this divorced woman with 2 children is probably not going to have more than 2 children. In some cases it happens, of course, but the tendency is against it. Whereas among Muslims is exactly the opposite. You see, the wife who has, a maternal instinct, she's deprived of her children. So, you see, if she wants to enjoy being a mother, she'll have to hurry to marry again and have more children. So, by that mechanism alone, let alone all the rest, by that mechanism alone, already Muslim women are going to have more children than Hindu women. Even if they start out with the same prospect, the same desire for children, it is the Muslim woman who's going to have more.
Got it.
Yes.
Got it.
And so generally the desire to have more children is more present among them.
Got it.
And among Hindus, you have far more westernization with the concomitant avoidance of large families.
Got it.
Right? So, yes, you see that demographic differential is there. And so you can try to downplay by saying, yeah, but you see, among Muslims, there are also fewer children now. It is true that there is a downward trend among practically all communities in the world, but the consequential thing is the difference between the different communities. So among Muslims, there are always more children than among the comparable number of Hindus. Like rich Muslims have more children than rich Hindus. Poor Muslims are going to have more children. Poor Hindus are going to have more children. But there also, it is the Muslims that have more than the Hindus. So that percentage of Muslims is going up, up, up. And the census figures confirm it. I remember in 1991, after the census, which then gave a percentage of, I think, 12 something percent Muslims. Mani Shankar Iyer, Congress advisor of Rajiv Gandhi, predicted that the percentage of Muslims is going to remain the same. So 30 years later, we know that that is not true, that was a wrong prediction, a falsified prediction, the percentage has been going up. And it is expected that the next census is going to see an even steeper climb of the Muslim percentage. Because you see, earlier, the last generation that was frantically busy with birth control, okay, has seen a much lower birth rate among Hindus than among Muslims. Those babies from back then are the mothers of today. So there are, in percentage, in proportion, fewer Hindu mothers than Muslim mothers, who themselves, well, I mean, a lower percentage than expected among Hindus than among Muslims, and those mothers themselves are going to have fewer children.
Got it.
Right? So there is an acceleration of the growth of the Muslim percentage. Right? Now, is this a problem? Some people say, yeah, this is a problem and we must remedy it by passing laws disallowing more than 2 children per woman, which still gives an advantage to Muslims because a man can have several wives. And each of them has 2 children, and the man can have 6 or 8 children. Yes. Anyways, some kind of law of that type, a fixed number of children per father or per mother. So some people propose that. Now, I'd like to warn against that. First of all, I don't like the states to meddle with that. Though I accept, you see, in extreme cases, maybe right. I remember when I was in university, our professor went to China regularly and he commented a lot on Chinese politics and especially on the one child per family policy that counted at that time, being abolished now because it was too successful. Now there's a very low birth rate in China. But so he said at that time, you see, the only way to prevent the population from galloping completely, you see, and really destroying the Mother Earth, that's the one child policy.
Got it.
And which has as an extra effect that it leads to a lower birth rate among girls.
Got it.
Because back in the past, it happened after birth, postnatal abortion. Now, of course, they have machines and they can foresee the sex of the baby already in the womb with, what is it, amniocentesis or something, ultrasound. And so more girls are aborted.
Got it.
And so you have seen in Korea, in China, and in India, a lower birth rate for girls, which of course, after decades, creates a big problem with many young men who can't find a wife. But so, hard-headed policymaker like Deng Xiaoping reasoned, well, if there are not enough women, all the better, because it's the women who determine the number of children that are possible. So, you see, if these men can't become fathers and so, yeah, that's a pity for them, but collectively it's a good thing because it lowers the birth rate. All right. And so in India, this was never an official policy. But of course, I am very sure that policymakers like Sanjay Gandhi also realize this. You see that enforced birth control is going to lead to a larger elimination of female babies.
Got it. Got it.
And so they thought, from the collective, the perspective of the collective good, this is a good thing. Let those individuals suffer, but at least the birth rate will come down.
Got it.
Anyway, so now we are in the next phase where people are worrying about low birth rates.
Okay.
And so the Chinese policy of the People's Republic was perhaps not necessary, because the lowering of the birth rate in the People's Republic and that in Taiwan is like very parallel. And so in Taiwan, without any government interference, you also have a too low birth rate. You have a decline of population. Korea has the lowest birth rate in the world. And so here again, you see North Korea is doing better than South Korea. With all this Americanized freedom, that there is even less incentive to have children. So that sort of paints the situation. And so, for a number of reasons, one of them, of course, is that the Muslim community is more loyal to itself.
Okay.
Is less Americanized. Okay. See, even though they watch the same TV programs and so on, nevertheless, they are more Muslim than the Hindus are Hindu. And so they are more traditional, and therefore also, for a number of reasons, but this is also one, therefore they have still a little bit higher number of children.
Can India become more Hindu without becoming less inclusive? What is your take on that?
No, wait a minute. We're not done yet.
Okay.
You asked me about the demographic. Well, you see, I agree with the analysis of the demographic facts. So, you see, some people predict by the end of the century, India will be a Muslim majority country. I agree. Same for Europe, by the way. India and Europe are now in the same boat. They are both heading straight to a Muslim majority. Except, I don't think so.
Okay.
Why? Because, and here I'm going to conclude with saying, I told you so. You see, in the 90s, when I was, developing my observations on Islam, I, of course, also, was very aware of this demographic differential. And so many people at the time were also already making similar predictions. But I said, well, there is one factor that you don't take into account. It is Muslims leaving Islam. And here I was very aware of that possibility because I had lived through it myself. In Catholicism, you see, my country was effectively a Catholic frontline state.
Okay.
And still, in a few decades, that Catholic dominance has collapsed. Even the remaining Catholics are much less Catholic than they used to be. But many people, the majority in fact, has left the church. And in the beginning, you see, the bishops were not aware that this was happening or that this was going to happen. The first symptom was fewer vocations. People wanted to remain Catholic, but not make the supreme sacrifice of becoming a celibate priest. So that was already a symptom. And then, everything else happened. People didn't want to follow Catholic morality and so on and so on. Now, that I see now starting to happen in the Muslim world. And the reason why is also the same. It is not so much Americanization. It is not materialism. It is not wealth. Indeed, you see, in Islam, the idea has always been you are wealthy precisely in order to promote Islam also demographically. Like Osama bin Laden, he had 5 wives and 30 children. Okay, he was a billionaire. The Ambanis or whoever is rich in India, they have like 2 children, typically, not 30. See, so in their case, there is no contrast between being rich and having children. You see, in the West, there is. However, what is happening now is that more and more Muslims get to know of the problems with Islam. You see, they used to be safely indoctrinated in madrasas with a very rosy picture of Islam. And now, two things are percolating down to the masses that used to be known only to a few scholars who specialized in that. One is the rather sorry moral record of Islam through history, with all the destruction against other people. Also, the problem of the position of women in Islam. That's not exclusive to Islam, but Islam is a rather poignant case. That's also, something that they're less and less proud of. But what is really important? Well, why is this not so important? You see, people don't feel guilty about their ancestors. Now you see white people are being tutored to be ashamed of their slave owning ancestors and so on, as if they committed that much more crimes than anyone else. But that's not a normal situation. People are quite proud of their cruel ancestors. In Mongolia, everybody is a fan of Genghis Khan. In Uzbekistan, everybody is a fan of Timur. There are statues of Timur and boulevards named after Timur and so on. If Hitler had won the war, he would be very popular in Germany now. Stalin is very popular in the ex-Soviet Union, especially in Georgia, also in Russia. So the fact that Muslims have done a few not so nice things against others, that is not so much what is bringing Muslims out of Islam. Far more consequential is the democratization of basic theology. You see, they learn about how Islam came about. And so when they study these basic facts about Prophet Muhammad, about Mecca and so on, they are very disappointed. You see, there has recently been very deconstructive research about Islam that shows a number of things that Muslims themselves are aghast at when they learn about it. For example, Islam is in fact an evolute of a particular Christian sect, the Christian heresy, repudiated by the Orthodox Christianity, namely anti-Trinitarian Christianity, of which Nestorianism in Persia is a bit of an evolute in its own right. But so they believed in God the Father and no one else. So there's no Holy Ghost and there is no Son of God. You see, Jesus is supposed to be the Son of God for Christians. And so that is repudiated in the Quran repeatedly. Why? It was earlier repudiated in Christianity, at least in a minoritarian set of Christianity. A lot of claims about the genesis of Islam turn out not to be correct. Much of the Quran is based on a Christian lectionary, like a prayer book essentially. So the oldest chapters of the Quran clearly have that origin. Then Mecca didn't exist.
Got it. Got it.
You know, I mean, not that Mecca is that important. If you believe that there is only one Lord of the universe, one creator, then these details like Mecca are less important. Still, you see, if you learned about, the Muhammad, he was great and he lived in Mecca and so on, then you learn that there was no Mecca. I mean, that's a bit of a shock.
Got it. Got it.
And so if they can be wrong about that, what else are they wrong about? And so you now get the phenomenon of ex-Muslims, Muslims leaving Islam. And so in the West, in the expatriate Muslim communities, you do see this on a substantial scale. Mind you, not enough yet to prevent the growth of Islam. So far, the growing of Islam by a higher birth rate and by continued immigration is enough to make you not notice that there are also many Muslims leaving. But you see, ultimately, it's the Muslims leaving that is a trend that is going to win through. Please, I predict that.
Got it. Got it.
Of that, I am rather sure.
I think we have talked more about India becoming more Hindu. So I think I would like to conclude the podcast because it is more than 60, 70 minutes. So what would an ideal Hindu India look like to you in 20 years? What role should education, media, and temples play in shaping that vision actually?
Well, it's already in the Constitution. It was put there with an anti-Hindu intention, but it may work out pro-Hindu. Namely, the notion of the scientific temper. In fact, what I just said about Muslims leaving Islam is because of the scientific temper. You see, thanks to the internet, thanks to the podcasts, you see, a lot of knowledge is immediately at your fingertips. You see, in the old days, you had to buy books and you had to read them and so on. It was tedious and it's very much not the Indian temperament. And now, in the old days, you had storytellers who came to the village square and they called everyone, come on, you see a story from the Mahabharata. And you see that oral culture that is being reproduced today through, YouTube. And so a lot of knowledge is now made digestible for people who otherwise would never learn it. And so, in that sense, you see, a scientific look at religion, that absolutely must be spread. Now, in the case of Islam and Christianity, that's going to go against the very basis of these religions. You see, Jesus was not resurrected. He was not born from a virgin. Whatever he did, it did not take away the sins of mankind. You see, the Quran was not revealed to Muhammad. It's a very human document. God was in nothing, was not in it. God did not allow Muhammad to come to heaven and to split the moon and to fly on a winged horse to Jerusalem and so on. I mean, come on. Now, in Hinduism, you also have miracle stories, and they too are not going to survive the scientific temper, but they are embellishments, you see. They are not the core of the religion. So, apart from some dead wood that is going to fall by the wayside, in its essence, Hinduism is going to survive. Whereas I don't think that Islam or Christianity are going to survive. You see, anything that starts also has an end. What goes up must come down. Therefore, religions created by some human being, don't have eternal life.
Got it.
Sanatana religion, an eternal religion, has better prospects.
Thank you so much for your wonderful time, sir. It's an eye-opening session as well. So we have discussed a lot of topics in detail and in-depth manner. I hope we should have more discussion regarding this in detail there. So thank you so much, sir.